My name is Aaliyah Brooks, and the night my husband publicly accused me of carrying another man's baby, I lost my marriage, my family, and everything I thought I knew about my life in less than 10 minutes. Looking back now, I realize the humiliation wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a carefully planned execution, and I was the only person in the room who didn't know it. The night began at the Grand Regency Ballroom in downtown Atlanta. More than 300 guests had gathered to celebrate my husband, Terrence Brooks, and the 5th anniversary of his appointment as senior pastor of New Hope Fellowship, one of the fastest-growing churches in the state. Terrence loved events like this. He loved attention, respect, and admiration. To everyone around him, he was a model husband, a respected spiritual leader, and a man destined for even greater success. For 5 years, I believed that image too. I stood beside him through every late-night meeting, every fundraising campaign, every expansion project, and every challenge that came with leading a large congregation. I handled finances, organized events, and quietly fixed problems before they became public. When people praised Terrence for his success, I smiled because I genuinely believed we were a team. That night, I thought I was bringing him the greatest gift imaginable. 3 days earlier, my fertility specialist had called with results I had spent years praying to hear. I was pregnant. After multiple treatments, countless appointments, tears, disappointments, and thousands of dollars spent trying to start a family, I was finally carrying our child. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not even my closest friends. I wanted Terrence to hear it first. I wanted that moment to belong to us. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Church leaders, local politicians, business executives, and influential donors filled the room. Everyone was celebrating Terrence. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was raising glasses in his honor. Around 8:30, I slipped the ultrasound image into a small gift box and waited for the perfect moment. When Terrence finished his speech and stepped down from the stage, I walked toward him. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it would burst from excitement. The crowd noticed immediately. People smiled and moved closer. They assumed I was about to give a heartfelt tribute to my husband. In a way, I was. I handed him the box. "I have a surprise for you," I said. The room grew quiet. Terrence smiled for the audience. Cameras appeared. Several guests raised phones to record the moment. He opened the box and pulled out the ultrasound image. For a second, I waited for joy. I waited for shock. I waited for tears. Instead, his smile vanished. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Terrence stared at the image. Then he looked at me. What happened next didn't make sense. Not at first. "What is this?" he asked. I laughed nervously. "It's our baby." The silence became uncomfortable, then terrifying. Terrence slowly placed the ultrasound image on the table beside him. "That's impossible." My stomach tightened. "What?" His voice grew louder. I said that's impossible. Several guests exchanged confused looks. I could feel people staring. "Terrence, what are you talking about?" He took a step backward as though I had contaminated him. 3 years ago, he announced loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, I had a vasectomy. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. The room exploded into whispers. My pulse stopped. "What?" I whispered. "You heard me." I stared at him. 3 years ago? A vasectomy? We had spent years trying to have children. Years. Doctor appointments, treatments, medications, tests, hope, disappointment, hope again. The idea made no sense. "You're lying." Terrence shook his head. "No, I've been protecting this secret because I didn't want to embarrass you." The audience gasped. My chest felt hollow. "Terrence." "Then suddenly tonight," he continued, "you present evidence that you're pregnant." His expression hardened. "So maybe it's time everyone hears the truth." I felt dizzy. Something was terribly wrong. Terrence wasn't reacting like a shocked husband. He was delivering a speech, a prepared speech. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My mother wasn't surprised. She was sitting at the front table beside my younger sister, Kendra. Neither of them looked confused. Neither of them looked shocked. They looked nervous, as if they already knew where this was going. "Mom?" I whispered. She avoided my eyes. Terror spread through my body. Terrence turned toward the crowd. For years, I stood by my wife despite her inability to give me a family. The cruelty of that sentence hit harder than a slap. Terrence, stop. He ignored me. I supported her emotionally, financially, spiritually. More whispers spread through the room. And now she wants me to believe this child is mine. The ballroom became a courtroom. Every eye landed on me. Every judgment, every assumption, every accusation. The baby is yours, I said. My voice shook. You know it is. Then explain the vasectomy. I couldn't, because I had never heard about one. Not once. Not ever. The realization shattered me. Either Terrence was lying now or he had been lying for years. Both possibilities were horrifying. Then my mother stood. Aaliyah. The disappointment in her voice hurt even more than Terrence's accusations. Please tell me this isn't true. I stared at her in disbelief. You're taking his side? Just answer the question. My own mother couldn't even pretend to support me. Kendra lowered her eyes. Several churchwomen began whispering openly. One donor shook his head. Another looked embarrassed for Terrence. Not me. For him. The narrative had already been written. I was the villain. Terrence was the victim. I've done nothing wrong, I said. Terrence sighed dramatically. Then maybe a paternity test will clear everything up. The crowd murmured approval. Approval. Like I was standing trial. Like I needed to prove my innocence. Suddenly, every strange moment from the past year started flashing through my mind. Secret phone calls. Late meetings. Unexplained absences. Financial conversations Terrence refused to discuss. Something wasn't right. Something much bigger was happening, but I couldn't see it yet. All I could see was my life collapsing around me. Then Terrence delivered the final blow. I think it's best if you leave. My heart stopped. What? You're embarrassing yourself. The room went silent. 300 people watched my husband throw me out of an event honoring him. Nobody moved. Nobody defended me. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not a single person. I looked around the ballroom, searching for one familiar face willing to stand beside me. I found none. Terrence pointed toward the exit. Please leave. The humiliation was complete. My marriage was over. My reputation was destroyed. And somehow, deep inside, I knew this wasn't about a pregnancy. It was about something else. Something Terrence desperately didn't want me to discover. As I walked toward the ballroom doors carrying the ultrasound image that should have been the happiest moment of my life, I noticed Connor Williams, Terrence's closest friend and financial advisor, watching me from across the room. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified. I don't remember leaving the ballroom. People often ask what humiliation feels like, and the truth is that it doesn't arrive all at once. First comes confusion, then disbelief, then a strange numbness that protects you from collapsing in front of everyone. The pain comes later. The pain comes when you're alone. By the time I reached the parking garage beneath the Grand Regency, Atlanta's skyline was blurred behind tears. I could no longer hold back. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before unlocking my car. The ultrasound image sat on the passenger seat beside me. Only 30 minutes earlier, it represented the happiest moment of my life. Now it felt like evidence in a crime I didn't commit. I sat behind the wheel and stared through the windshield for nearly 20 minutes. My phone vibrated continuously. Text messages, missed calls, church members, friends, acquaintances. Curiosity spreads faster than truth. By the time I left the garage, half the city probably knew Pastor Terrence Brooks's wife had been accused of carrying another man's child. None of them knew the real story. Neither did I. Around 11 o'clock, I finally drove home. Part of me still believed there had to be an explanation. Maybe Terrence was having a breakdown. Maybe someone had manipulated him. Maybe there was some misunderstanding involving medical records. Every possibility sounded ridiculous, yet all of them seemed more believable than the reality I had just experienced. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. The lights inside the house were on. Several boxes sat near the front door. My stomach tightened. I hurried inside. Terrence was waiting in the living room. Connor sat beside him. Neither looked surprised to see me. They looked prepared. The realization hit me immediately. This wasn't a conversation. This was another stage of the plan. "What's going on?" I asked. Terrence folded his hands. "We need to discuss practical matters." Practical matters. Not my pregnancy. Not the public humiliation. Not the accusation. Practical matters. I stared at the boxes. "What are those?" "Your belongings." For several seconds I couldn't breathe. "My what?" My, 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 my. Connor stood. "Maybe we should keep this civil." I looked directly at him. "Get out of my house." Connor didn't move. That was when I noticed the legal envelope on the coffee table. My pulse accelerated. Terrence picked it up and slid it toward me. "You should read it." Inside were separation documents, preliminary divorce paperwork, property notices, account access changes. Everything had already been prepared. Every signature line, every legal reference, every clause. My hands started shaking again. "How long have you been planning this?" Terrence didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. "How long?" I repeated. "Long enough to protect myself." The cruelty of his calmness hurt more than shouting would have. I looked around the room. The house we bought together. The furniture we chose together. The photographs lining the walls. Suddenly everything felt fake, like I had spent years living inside a stage set while someone else wrote the script. "You're divorcing me because I'm pregnant?" Terrence laughed softly. "No." He leaned back. "I'm divorcing you because you're a liability." Liability. After 7 years of marriage, that was the word he chose. Not wife. Not partner. Not family. Liability. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to think. Something wasn't adding up. The vasectomy story, the divorce papers, the public humiliation. The timing was too perfect. Nobody organizes a legal separation in a single evening. This had been planned weeks or months in advance, which meant Terrence knew exactly what he was going to do before I walked into that ballroom. "Why now?" I asked quietly. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not guilt. Not shame. Irritation. Like I was asking the wrong question. "Because this marriage has been over for a long time." Another lie. I could feel it. Not because I knew the truth, because his answer sounded rehearsed. Then Connor's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and immediately looked nervous. Very nervous. The reaction lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Terrence saw it too. Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them. Fear. The same fear I noticed in the ballroom. Suddenly I remembered Connor's expression while everyone else was judging me. He wasn't enjoying my destruction. He was worried. Terrified even. Terrified of what? Before I could ask, Terrence stood. "You need to leave tonight." I stared at him. "Leave?" "The house is in my name." Another lie. I knew enough about our finances to know that wasn't true. Both our names appeared on the mortgage. Both our names appeared on ownership records. Yet Terrence said it anyway. Why? Because he assumed I wouldn't challenge him. Because he assumed I was too broken to fight. No. The word surprised even me. Terrence's eyes narrowed. "What?" "No." For the first time that night, I saw genuine anger appear beneath his calm mask. "Don't make this difficult. You publicly accused me of cheating. You hid a supposed vasectomy for 3 years. You prepared divorce papers before speaking to me. And now you're throwing me out of my own house." My voice hardened. "It's already difficult." Connor shifted uncomfortably. Terrence stepped closer. "Aaliyah, you're not thinking clearly." There it was, the first real mistake. Not an accusation, not an insult, a strategy. He wanted me emotional, irrational, unstable. Suddenly I understood why the pregnancy announcement mattered so much. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about controlling the narrative afterward. If I looked unstable, nobody would question his version of events. The realization sent a chill through me. "What are you hiding?" I asked. Terrence froze. Only for a moment. But it happened. Connor looked down immediately. "I'm not hiding anything." Another lie. I could feel it. Then my phone rang. "Mom, of course," I answered. "Aaliyah, please stop making things worse." I almost laughed. Making things worse? Terrence is devastated. The room became perfectly silent. Even Connor looked uncomfortable. My own mother was calling to comfort the man who had publicly destroyed me. Mom, he accused me of carrying another man's child. Then explained the pregnancy. I closed my eyes. There it was. Nobody wanted answers. They wanted a confession. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call. 10 minutes later, I loaded 2 suitcases into my car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who I could trust. Around 2 in the morning, I parked near a 24-hour gas station and checked my bank account. The balance appeared on the screen. $4.17. I stared at the number in disbelief. Then I checked the savings account. Empty. Joint account. Empty. Emergency account. Empty. Every account I could access had been drained. My heart started pounding. This wasn't separation. This was financial execution. Terrence hadn't simply ended our marriage. He had spent months positioning me to lose everything in a single night. I reclined the driver's seat and tried to sleep. I failed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ballroom, the accusations, my mother's disappointment, Connor's fear, Terrence's smile. Then, shortly after sunrise, my phone rang. The number came from New York. I almost ignored it. Almost. That decision changed my life, because the man waiting on the other end wasn't calling about my marriage. He was calling about a secret someone had taken to the grave, a secret worth $77 million. I answered the call because I had nothing left to lose. After spending the entire night sleeping in my car with $4.17 in my bank account, a strange phone number from New York didn't seem important. What I didn't know was that the next 15 minutes would completely change the direction of my life. "Is this Aaliyah Brooks?" a calm male voice asked. "Yes. My name is Richard Sterling. I'm an attorney with Sterling, Hayes, and Rothman in Manhattan." I sat upright immediately. The firm sounded familiar, not because I had ever worked with them, but because only wealthy people hired attorneys from firms like that. "I think you have the wrong number. I assure you I don't." He paused. "I need to discuss the estate of Jamal Washington." The name hit me like a physical blow. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Jamal Washington. The man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years. The man I once believed I would spend the rest of my life with. The man my family convinced me to leave. "What about Jamal?" My voice barely worked. Silence followed. Then Sterling spoke carefully. "Mr. Washington passed away 11 days ago. Everything around me disappeared. The gas station, the cars, the morning traffic, all of it faded into the background. Jamal was dead. I hadn't seen him in years, but the news still hurt in a place I thought had healed long ago." "How?" I finally asked. "A heart condition." I closed my eyes. Jamal had always worked too hard. Even in his 20s, he treated every opportunity like it might disappear tomorrow. "I'm sorry to be the person delivering this news." I swallowed hard. "Why are you calling me?" Another pause. Then the sentence that changed everything. "Because you are the primary beneficiary of his estate." I genuinely thought I misheard him. "What?" "Mr. Washington named you as the primary beneficiary." My heart started pounding. "That doesn't make sense." "It does according to his will." I laughed once. A broken laugh. Nothing about this morning made sense. 8 hours earlier, I had been publicly accused of cheating. 4 hours earlier, I discovered my husband had emptied our accounts. Now a New York attorney was telling me a man I hadn't spoken to in years left me something in his will. "How much?" I asked. The question felt ridiculous the moment it left my mouth. Sterling answered anyway. "The current estimated value of the estate is approximately $77 million. I almost dropped the phone. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. 77 million. Not 700,000. Not 7 million. $77 million. That's impossible." "No, Miss Brooks." "It isn't." My hands started shaking. "Jamal and I grew up in the same neighborhood. When we married, neither of us had much money. He was ambitious, brilliant, and relentless, but $77 million belonged in a different universe. There has to be a mistake." "There isn't." Sterling's voice remained calm. "Mr. Washington built and later sold several technology companies. Most people outside his business circles weren't aware of the scale of his success." I leaned back against the seat and stared through the windshield. 8 years. 8 years without speaking to him. 8 years without knowing what became of his life. Why me? Another long pause. That's a question he anticipated. My pulse accelerated. What does that mean? Mr. Washington left a recorded message that answers it. Suddenly, none of this felt real. The lawyer arranged a meeting for the following afternoon. A private jet ticket would be waiting at Atlanta Airport. A hotel suite had already been reserved. Transportation would be provided. Every detail had been planned. Before ending the call, Sterling said something that stayed with me the entire day. Mr. Washington spent years preparing for this possibility. What possibility? Silence, then a quiet answer. The possibility that one day you would need help. After the call ended, I sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes. My marriage had collapsed less than 12 hours earlier. Yet somehow the man everyone told me to leave was reaching into my life from beyond the grave. The irony was almost unbearable. By noon, I was on a flight to New York. During the entire trip, memories kept returning. Jamal teaching me how to invest my first paycheck. Jamal working 16-hour days to launch his first company. Jamal telling me I deserved better than people who only loved me when I was useful. Back then, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I wasn't so sure. The following afternoon, I entered Sterling's office overlooking Manhattan. The room felt more like a private bank than a law firm. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original artwork, quiet confidence, wealth without the need to show off. Sterling greeted me personally and guided me into a conference room. A single folder rested on the table. Beside it sat a small digital tablet. Before we discuss the estate, he said, Mr. Washington asked that you watch this first. My throat tightened. Sterling pressed play and left the room. The screen flickered to life. Then Jamal appeared, older than I remembered, more mature, more successful, but unmistakably Jamal. For several seconds, he simply smiled at the camera. Then he spoke. If you're watching this, it means I ran out of time. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Jamal nodded as though he expected that reaction. I know you're probably confused, maybe angry, maybe both. He laughed softly. Honestly, you have every right to be. I couldn't look away. The first thing you need to know is that none of this is charity. I'm not helping you because I felt sorry for you. I'm helping you because you were the only person who believed in me before anyone else did. My hands trembled. Jamal continued. Your family spent years convincing you that leaving me was the right choice. I never blamed you for that. The tears started falling, but I also never stopped paying attention. My pulse accelerated. Something in his voice had changed. The warmth remained, but now there was something else beneath it. Concern. Serious concern. There are people around you who are not who they pretend to be. I sat forward. What does that mean? Of course he couldn't answer. It was a recording, yet somehow it felt like he was speaking directly to me. For several years, I hired investigators to monitor certain financial activities connected to individuals in Atlanta. My heart stopped. Financial activities? Investigators? Suddenly, Connor's terrified expression from the ballroom flashed through my mind. Jamal looked directly into the camera. If the people I'm worried about have finally done what I think they're capable of doing, then you're going to need more than money. A chill ran through my body. You're going to need the truth. The screen faded to black. I sat there unable to move. $77 million wasn't the real surprise. The real surprise was that Jamal had been investigating something, and somehow, whatever he discovered had convinced him that one day I would be standing exactly where I was now. Then Sterling returned carrying another folder. It was much thicker than the first one. He placed it carefully on the table and looked directly at me. Miss Brooks, there's one more thing. My pulse quickened. What? Sterling opened the folder. You do inherit the $77 million. Relief lasted less than a second. However, there it was, the word that changes everything. However what? Sterling folded his hands. The inheritance comes with one condition. Sterling did not explain the condition immediately. He let the silence settle between us until I could hear the soft hum of the conference room lights and the distant traffic moving far below the Manhattan windows. I stared at the folder in front of him, my fingers still cold despite the warm room, and for one terrible second I wondered if Jamal had changed after all. Maybe this was some final test. Maybe this was punishment for leaving him years ago without telling him the truth. Maybe the man I once loved had carried resentment beneath all that calm intelligence and built one last impossible gate I could never pass. Sterling must have seen the fear on my face because his voice softened. Mr. Washington was very clear that this condition was not meant to hurt you. I laughed once, barely. People usually say that before hurting someone. He accepted that without offense. In this case, he meant to protect you. He opened the folder and turned the first page toward me. At the top was a title that made my entire body go still. Contingency Trust Activation Protocol. Beneath it, in clean legal language, Jamal had left instructions for the release of his estate. The $77 million would remain locked until I completed a specific professional task. Not personal. Professional. I had to use my license and expertise as a forensic accountant to review, document, and legally expose a suspected financial network connected to Greater Light Fellowship, Vanguard Investments, and multiple private entities operating between Georgia, Delaware, and offshore banking jurisdictions. I read the paragraph twice before looking up. He wanted me to investigate Terrence? Sterling shook his head. Not only Terrence. He reached into the folder and removed a second document. This one was not legal language. It was a summary. Names appeared in neat columns. Terrence Brooks, Connor Williams, Kendra Williams, Vivian Brooks. My throat tightened when I saw my mother's name. No, Sterling said nothing. No, I repeated, louder this time. My mother is cruel, controlling, obsessed with image, but she is not. I stopped because I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't know what she was anymore. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had watched my husband destroy me in a ballroom and treated me like the embarrassment. Sterling waited until I looked back at him. Jamal believed your mother had knowledge of certain activities. He did not have enough proof to define her role. That answer hurt because it was careful. Lawyers are careful when they know the truth might be worse than the evidence. I leaned back slowly. What exactly did Jamal find? Sterling opened the digital tablet again. This time there was no video. There were documents, charts, transfers, entity maps, screenshots, public filings, donation summaries. The kind of data most people would find boring. My mind recognized the danger immediately. Numbers do not scream. They whisper. And these numbers were whispering something ugly. Sterling explained that Jamal's company specialized in predictive analytics, fraud detection, and logistical risk modeling. After his first major acquisition, he quietly used private resources to study unusual financial behavior tied to Atlanta institutions connected to my family. At first, he had only wanted to understand why my mother had been so determined to separate us. Then he noticed patterns. Greater Light Fellowship had raised enormous amounts for a sanctuary expansion project that remained stalled year after year. Vanguard Investments, where Connor held a senior role, reported unusually profitable internal portfolios connected to faith-based development partnerships. Several consulting vendors appeared repeatedly in both ecosystems despite having little public business activity. It was not proof of a crime. Not yet. But it was enough to make a man like Jamal keep digging. Why didn't he report this? I asked. Sterling folded his hands. Because the evidence was incomplete, and because your name was attached to several joint tax filings, church committee records, and household financial disclosures through your marriage. The answer landed hard. If Jamal had dropped a half-built case into federal hands, I could have been pulled into the blast radius without protection. Terrence would have happily pointed at me. My mother would have protected the family image. Connor would have hidden behind corporate complexity. Kendra would have cried on command. And I would have been exactly what they had tried to make me last night. Isolated, discredited, and broke. So Jamal waited, I said quietly. Sterling nodded. He waited until he could structure protection around you. I looked at the folder again. $77 million was not a gift. It was armor. It was funding. It was a weapon forged by a man who had loved me enough to think beyond his own life. My eyes burned, but I forced the tears back. What does the trust require specifically? Sterling turned another page. You must produce a legally reviewable forensic report identifying the source, movement, and beneficiaries of the suspected diverted funds. You must submit that report through counsel to the appropriate authorities. And you must do so without knowingly falsifying, fabricating, or unlawfully obtaining evidence. That last part mattered. Jamal knew me. He knew I would be angry enough to burn the world if I had to. He also knew anger could ruin a case. So I have to bring them down legally. Exactly. And if I refuse? Sterling did not flinch. The estate converts to the Jamal Washington Innovation Foundation. You receive nothing beyond temporary safety funding. I stared at him. Temporary safety funding? For the first time, he almost smiled. Mr. Washington anticipated that the night you needed this information, you might not be in a strong financial position. A bitter laugh escaped me. That is one way to describe sleeping in a car with $4. Sterling's expression changed. Not pity, respectful concern. Then he was right. He reached into a smaller envelope and slid a matte black card across the table. $500,000 has been placed in a restricted advance account under your name. It is legally classified as investigative funding and personal safety support. It does not require repayment regardless of whether you complete the condition. I stared at the card. Hours earlier, I had counted loose change under a gas station light. Now $500,000 sat in front of me like a bridge out of hell. For a moment I could not touch it. It felt too large, too unreal, too connected to Jamal's death. Sterling waited. He also left instructions that you choose your own lodging, medical care, legal counsel, and security immediately. I looked up. Security? Mr. Washington believed the people involved might become dangerous if threatened. I thought of Terrence's calm face as he told me to leave, Connor's terrified eyes, my mother's silence, my sister's absence, the way every account had been drained before dinner even started. They already are dangerous, I said. Sterling nodded once. Then you understand why this must be done carefully. For the next hour, he walked me through the first layer of the dossier. I learned that Jamal had tracked repeated payments from Greater Lights Building Fund to consulting vendors with vague service descriptions. I learned that some vendors had indirect ties to Vanguard-managed investment products. I learned that those investment products produced suspiciously timed gains that later appeared connected to luxury purchases by people close to Terrence and Connor. Nothing was clean enough for prosecution yet. Everything was suspicious enough to investigate. That was the difference between gossip and evidence. Evidence had to survive cross-examination. Evidence had to be obtained properly. Evidence had to tell a story so clearly that even a defense attorney could not bury it under noise. By the time Sterling finished, the sun was starting to lower over Manhattan. My old life felt impossibly far away, even though it had collapsed only yesterday. I looked at the ultrasound image still tucked inside my purse. My baby. Terrence had used that child to shame me publicly. My mother had used that shame to protect her reputation. Now Jamal was asking me to uncover the truth they were hiding behind my humiliation. There is something else, Sterling said. My chest tightened. Of course there is. He slid one final page across the table. It contained a timeline. 3 years ago, Terrence allegedly had his vasectomy. 3 years ago, the suspicious vendor activity intensified. 3 years ago, Connor's investment division began reporting unusual growth. 3 years ago, Kendra and Connor started displaying wealth far beyond their reported income. 3 years ago, my marriage began quietly changing in ways I had ignored because I was too busy trying to become a mother. The pattern was not proof, but it was enough to make my skin go cold. Sterling watched me read the dates. Jamal believed the vasectomy may not have been a private marital decision. I looked up slowly. Then what was it? A financial decision. The room seemed to tilt. A vasectomy as a financial decision made no sense until I remembered the divorce papers, the empty accounts, the accusation, the public stage Terrence had chosen. A child-complicated divorce. A child-complicated assets. A child-complicated reputation. And a wife trained to follow money complicated everything. Terrence had not merely hidden a medical procedure. He had built a future where I could be removed cleanly when I became inconvenient. My hands curled around the edge of the table. What do you need from me? Sterling closed the folder. A decision. I looked down at the black card, then at Jamal's dossier, then at the city beyond the glass, full of people moving through ordinary lives while mine balanced on the edge of war. I thought about the ballroom, the whispers, my mother's face, Terrence pointing me toward the exit like I was trash, Connor watching me with fear he couldn't hide. I thought about Jamal, dying with enough love and discipline to leave me not just money, but a path out. When I finally picked up the card, my hand was steady. "Book me the first flight back to Atlanta," I said. Sterling's eyes sharpened. "Are you accepting the condition?" I placed the black card on top of the dossier and stood. "No," I said quietly. "I'm accepting the truth." That evening, as I left Sterling's office with Jamal's files locked inside an encrypted drive, my phone buzzed with a new message from Terrence. It contained a photo of the divorce petition and one sentence: "Sign quietly, or I will make sure you lose your license, your baby, and your freedom." I read it twice in the back of the car. Then I looked at the dossier beside me and smiled for the first time since the ballroom. Terrence had just threatened a forensic accountant while hiding a financial crime. He didn't know it yet, but he had chosen the worst possible enemy. 24 hours earlier, I had been sleeping in my car with $4.17 in my bank account. Now I was stepping out of a black SUV in downtown Atlanta carrying an encrypted drive, a $500,000 investigative fund, and enough questions to destroy multiple lives. The contrast should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt terrifying. Because for the first time, I understood something I had missed during my marriage. Terrence wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of what I might discover if I ever stopped trusting him. The message he sent from the divorce attorney's office proved it. "Sign quietly, or I will make sure you lose your license, your baby, and your freedom." Most people would have read that as intimidation. I read it as panic. Innocent people do not threaten forensic accountants into silence. They welcome scrutiny. Terrence was trying to stop something before it started. The question was why. My first stop wasn't a hotel. It was a bank. Sterling had already arranged access to the investigative account. When the branch manager confirmed the balance, I sat there staring at the screen for several seconds. $500,000. For the first time since the ballroom, I had options. Real options. A place to stay. Legal protection. Professional resources. The ability to fight without worrying about whether I could afford gas money tomorrow. Jamal had not simply left me money. He had removed desperation from the equation. Desperate people make mistakes. Protected people can think. By noon, I checked into a long-term executive suite overlooking Midtown Atlanta. Terrence expected me to disappear into survival mode. He expected me to spend weeks searching for work, begging family members for help, and defending myself against rumors. Instead, I converted the largest room in the suite into a temporary command center. 3 whiteboards covered one wall. A secure laptop sat on the desk. Jamal's encrypted files occupied the center of the room. For the first time, I allowed myself to review everything without interruption. Names, companies, transfers, timelines. The pattern became clearer with every hour. Greater Light Fellowship raised millions for expansion projects that never seemed to move forward. Connor's investment division repeatedly benefited from entities connected to church-related development efforts. Consulting firms appeared and disappeared. Money moved. Ownership shifted. Records changed. Individually, none of it proved wrongdoing. Together, it felt like a map leading toward something hidden. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. "Terrence." I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another call, then another. Finally, a message appeared. "You need to stop talking to people." I stared at the text and smiled. Interesting. He wasn't asking where I was. He wasn't asking about the pregnancy. He wasn't even asking me to sign the divorce papers. He wanted to know who I was talking to. That meant he was worried about information, not emotions. Information. I saved the message and moved on. By evening, I had identified the first person I needed to hire. Marcus Reed, former FBI financial crimes investigator. Jamal's files referenced him twice. After leaving federal service, he built a reputation as one of the most respected private investigators in the Southeast. He also charged enough money to discourage anyone from wasting his time. The next morning, we met at a small restaurant north of Buckhead. Marcus arrived exactly on time, mid-50s, calm, observant, the type of man who noticed exits, cameras, and lies before sitting down. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything from the ballroom incident to Jamal's dossier. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. "Your husband made a mistake." I raised an eyebrow. Only one? For the first time, Marcus smiled. His biggest mistake was making you look harmless. That answer surprised me. Marcus opened the folder I had brought. People running legitimate operations don't panic when accountants ask questions. He tapped one of the timelines. People hiding something do. We spent 3 hours reviewing records. Unlike me, Marcus wasn't emotionally connected to anyone involved. He saw patterns without family history clouding his judgment. Several times he pointed out details I had missed. Transfers occurring shortly before major church fundraising campaigns. Vendors sharing mailing addresses. Consulting invoices approved by people who should never have approved them. Nothing explosive yet, but enough smoke to suggest a fire. Before leaving, Marcus gave me a warning. You need to assume they're watching. The statement made my stomach tighten. Watching how? Social media, financial activity, mutual contacts, family members. He leaned back. People protecting secrets don't wait until evidence appears. They monitor threats. Suddenly, several recent events looked different. The repeated calls, the pressure to sign quickly, the sudden concern from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in months. They weren't checking on me. They were checking my position, testing whether I had resources, testing whether I intended to fight. That evening, I received my answer from the state licensing board. Terrence had already filed a professional complaint against me. I read the notice twice, then a third time. According to the complaint, I had engaged in unethical financial conduct during our marriage. No evidence, no specifics, just allegations. Enough to trigger a review, exactly as he promised. The attack wasn't designed to win. It was designed to consume my time, to keep me defending myself instead of investigating him. The realization made me oddly calm. Every move Terrence made followed the same pattern. Silence critics, control narratives, create confusion, delay scrutiny. Which meant if he was willing to weaponize my professional license this quickly, he was protecting something worth far more than a marriage. Around midnight, while organizing timelines on the whiteboard, I noticed a date that appeared repeatedly throughout Jamal's files. 3 years earlier, the same year as the alleged vasectomy. The same year the suspicious vendors began receiving larger payments. The same year Connor's investment division started reporting unusually strong returns. The same year Terrence became strangely secretive about household finances. 1 year. Too many coincidences. I highlighted the date and stepped back. My eyes moved across the wall. Then something clicked. Not proof. Not yet. A question. What if the vasectomy wasn't the beginning of the story? What if it was part of a larger plan already in motion? The thought refused to leave me. Just after 1 a.m, Marcus sent an encrypted message. Only 7 words appeared on the screen. You need to see Connor's property records. My pulse accelerated immediately. I opened the attachment. 20 seconds later, I was standing in the middle of the room staring at a purchase history that made absolutely no sense. Connor Williams had acquired nearly $4 million in luxury assets over the last 3 years. Houses, vehicles, investment properties. Yet according to publicly available income disclosures, he shouldn't have been able to afford half of them. I looked back at the date on the whiteboard. 3 years ago. The same year, everything changed. Suddenly, Terrence's public humiliation, the divorce papers, the drained bank accounts, and Jamal's investigation no longer felt like separate events. They felt connected. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't looking at a broken marriage. I was looking at the outline of a financial conspiracy. The more I studied Connor Williams' property records, the less sense they made. I spent most of that night comparing purchase dates, mortgage filings, tax disclosures, and public compensation reports. By 2 a.m, my dining table looked like the command center of a federal investigation. Sheets of paper covered every available surface. Colored markers connected names, companies, and transactions. 3 years. Everything kept returning to the same period. 3 years ago, Connor began acquiring assets far beyond what his documented income should have supported. 3 years ago, Terrence supposedly had a vasectomy. 3 years ago, the church's building fund started bleeding money into outside vendors. 3 years ago, my marriage quietly began changing. Separately, none of those facts proved anything. Together, they looked like a roadmap. The next morning, Marcus arrived carrying coffee and bad news. You're already on their radar. I looked up from my laptop. How do you know? He tossed a folder onto the table. Because someone pulled records on you yesterday. My stomach tightened immediately. Who? Not sure yet. Marcus sat down. But it wasn't random. He explained that after my licensing complaint had been filed, someone began requesting information connected to my professional history, employment records, prior audits, client relationships. Nothing illegal, nothing unusual by itself. But combined with Terrence's threat, it painted a clear picture. They were building a defense before I had even launched an attack, which meant they were scared. Fear was useful. Fear caused mistakes. Marcus opened another file. Let's talk about Greater Light Fellowship. I immediately focused. This was the part of Jamal's investigation that bothered me most. Church members donated millions believing they were funding ministry expansion, scholarships, and community outreach. If someone was stealing from that, it wasn't just financial fraud. It was betrayal disguised as faith. Marcus slid several pages across the table. I requested public records tied to construction permits. I scanned the documents. The numbers didn't match. Fundraising campaigns had generated enormous amounts over the years, yet actual construction activity appeared limited, very limited. Where did the money go? Marcus smiled slightly. That's the question. For the next several hours, we followed transactions through a network of consulting companies. Most appeared legitimate at first glance. Professional websites, registered addresses, tax filings, everything looked clean. Then Marcus pointed at a company called Genesis Logistics Group. My pulse accelerated immediately. The name appeared repeatedly throughout Jamal's files. Why this one? I asked. Marcus leaned back. Because they're getting paid for work that doesn't seem to exist. We started digging. Genesis Logistics had received hundreds of thousands of dollars from entities connected to church development projects. Yet public records showed almost no employees. Almost no physical infrastructure. Almost no evidence of actual operations. Shell company? I asked. Marcus shook his head. Too early to say. Good investigators avoid assumptions. That was one reason I trusted him. Still, the deeper we looked, the stranger Genesis became. Payments entered. Money moved. New invoices appeared. Then the money moved again. Every trail seemed designed to create confusion rather than business value. Around 4 o'clock, I finally stepped away from the computer to call one of my former clients, a commercial contractor who had worked on multiple church projects throughout Georgia. After a brief conversation, I asked whether he had ever heard of Genesis Logistics. The line went quiet. Why are you asking? My pulse quickened. You know them? Another pause. I've seen invoices. For what? That's the weird part. He lowered his voice. Nobody could ever explain exactly what they did. After the call ended, I wrote his comments on the whiteboard. Another piece of smoke. Still no fire. But the room was starting to fill with it. That evening, I reviewed church board meeting minutes dating back nearly 4 years. Most were routine. Budgets, community programs, staffing issues. Then I found something interesting. 3 years earlier, the same year everything changed, Connor had joined a financial advisory committee overseeing several expansion initiatives. The appointment itself wasn't suspicious. Teaching was. Within months, Genesis Logistics began receiving larger payments. Within months, project expenses increased dramatically. Within months, fundraising campaigns intensified. I stared at the timeline. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Then Marcus called. I found something. The tone of his voice immediately got my attention. What? Genesis was incorporated 3 years ago. My heart skipped a beat. Exactly 3 years? Within the same quarter. I looked at the board in front of me. The same quarter as the vasectomy. The same quarter as Connor's unexplained wealth increase. The same quarter as the first suspicious transfers. Suddenly, the coincidence threshold was starting to break. 1 coincidence is random. 5 coincidences become a system. Marcus continued. There's more. Of course there was. There always was. The registered agent used for Genesis has represented multiple entities connected to Connor's investment network. My pulse accelerated. That wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was a connection. A real connection. For the first time, Connor was no longer standing near the investigation. He was standing inside it. Around midnight, exhausted but unable to sleep, I opened social media and made a mistake. I searched my own name. Hundreds of comments appeared beneath videos discussing Terrence's anniversary celebration. Most repeated the same narrative: cheater, liar, gold digger, attention seeker. The story was spreading exactly as Terrence intended. Then I found something worse. Several church leaders had publicly expressed support for him. People I had worked beside for years. People who attended my baby showers. People who sat at my table. Not one of them asked for my side of the story. My eyes burned. For the first time since New York, I felt genuinely alone again. Money couldn't fix that. Investigators couldn't fix that. Evidence couldn't fix that. Reputation damage has a way of becoming real even when built on lies. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence. If you're investigating Genesis, stop before Connor finds out. I sat upright immediately. Every trace of exhaustion vanished. I read the message 3 times. Then a fourth. Whoever sent it knew 2 things. First, they knew I was investigating. Second, they believed Connor was more dangerous than I realized. I called Marcus immediately. "We just got our first leak." He listened while I read the message aloud. Silence followed. Then he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Aaliyah, what if Connor isn't protecting Terrence?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "What if Terrence is protecting Connor?" The room suddenly felt colder. Because if that was true, then I had been looking at the hierarchy backwards this entire time. And if Connor sat higher than Terrence in whatever operation they were hiding, then the man everyone thought was merely the pastor's best friend might actually be the most dangerous person in the story. Marcus's question stayed with me long after the call ended. What if Terrence wasn't protecting Connor? What if Connor was protecting something much larger, and Terrence was simply one of the people helping keep it hidden? The possibility changed how I viewed everything. Up until that moment, I had treated Terrence as the center of the story. My husband, my marriage, my humiliation, my divorce. But financial conspiracies don't usually revolve around emotions. They revolve around money, and the more evidence we uncovered, the more money seemed to flow toward Connor's orbit. The next morning began badly. At 9 o'clock, I received official notice that the complaint against my CPA license had advanced to preliminary review. Terrence hadn't simply filed paperwork to intimidate me. He intended to drag the process as far as possible. Even if the complaint failed, defending myself would consume time, energy, and money. That was the point. I spent 2 hours assembling documents for my attorney before another problem arrived. My former employer called, not to offer support, to inform me that several clients had expressed concern about the public accusations surrounding my marriage. They weren't terminating relationships yet, but they wanted reassurance. I understood what that meant. Terrence wasn't only attacking my reputation, he was attacking my ability to earn a living. By lunchtime, I was angrier than I had been since the ballroom, not because of the attacks themselves, because they were working. Every hour spent defending myself was an hour not spent investigating them. For the first time, I understood why powerful people target credibility before evidence appears. If nobody believes you, the truth becomes much harder to hear. That afternoon, Marcus arrived carrying another stack of records. He took one look at my expression and immediately understood something had happened. "License issue?" he asked. I nodded. "Clients too." Marcus sat across from me. "Good." I stared at him. "Good? It means you're close." The answer surprised me. Marcus leaned forward. People don't waste resources attacking threats that don't matter. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Terrence had already emptied bank accounts, launched a divorce, filed professional complaints, and poisoned public opinion. Those weren't the actions of a man protecting his dignity. They were the actions of a man protecting information. Marcus opened a folder. "Let's see if we can figure out what he's so scared of." The next several hours produced the first major breakthrough since I returned from New York. We began comparing Genesis Logistics invoices against project schedules tied to church construction activity. At first, the numbers looked ordinary. Then I noticed something strange. Several invoices were approved before the corresponding work supposedly occurred, in some cases weeks before. I checked again. Same result. Marcus checked independently. Same result. Payments were being authorized before services existed. That's impossible, I said. Not impossible, Marcus tapped the page. Just dishonest. The discovery didn't prove theft, but it proved something equally important. Someone inside the system expected these invoices to be approved regardless of reality. That only happens when controls have been compromised. The deeper we dug, the worse it became. Multiple approvals carried electronic authorization codes linked to Terrence's office. Others connected to financial committees where Connor exercised influence. Neither connection was criminal by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. Around 6 o'clock, Marcus left to verify several corporate filings while I continued reviewing digital records. That's when I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Hidden inside a packet of archived church reports sat a list of restricted donors. Most names meant nothing to me. Then one jumped off the page. Eleanor Pierce. My breath caught immediately. Eleanor was one of the church's largest contributors, a retired real estate developer worth tens of millions of dollars. More importantly, she personally funded a significant portion of the expansion campaign. I searched further. Her donations exceeded $8 million over several years. $8 million. Yet construction progress remained limited. Suddenly, a disturbing possibility emerged. What if this wasn't only about church members donating small amounts? What if major donors had been funding projects that never truly existed? My pulse accelerated. I immediately called Marcus. 20 minutes later, he arrived back at the suite. We spent another hour reviewing donor reports. Then Marcus said something that changed the direction of the investigation. We need to talk to someone on the inside. I knew he was right. Documents were helpful. But eventually, every financial case reaches the same point. Someone who participated has to talk. Someone who saw the process from the inside has to explain what the paperwork hides. The challenge was finding that person. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Silence greeted me. Then a female voice. Quiet. Nervous. You're looking at the wrong person. My pulse jumped. Who is this? No answer. Who am I looking at? I asked. Another pause. Connor isn't the one making decisions. Every nerve in my body went alert. Then who is? The caller hesitated. I could hear breathing. Fear. Real fear. Be careful who you trust. Then the line disconnected. I stared at the phone. Marcus stared at me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally he asked, "What did she say?" I repeated the conversation word for word. The room fell silent. Connor isn't the one making decisions. The statement contradicted everything we had begun to suspect. Unless... Marcus suddenly stood and walked toward the whiteboard. He stared at the timeline for nearly a minute. Then he circled one name. Terrence Brooks. My stomach tightened. You think he's above Connor? Marcus shook his head slowly. I think we've been asking the wrong question. He pointed at the board. Connor gained wealth. He pointed again. Terrence gained influence. Another point. The church lost money. Then he stepped back. Who gained the most? I followed his logic. Wealth. Influence. Access. Reputation. The answer should have been obvious. Yet somehow I hadn't seen it before. Because I was still thinking like a wife, not an investigator. Then another realization hit me. 3 years ago, when everything started changing, Terrence didn't just become secretive. He also became obsessed with one specific topic: legacy, public image, expansion. Building something bigger than himself. At the time, I thought it was ambition. Now I wasn't so sure. Just before midnight, Marcus received a response to one of his corporate record requests. He opened the attachment, read the first page, and immediately went silent. What? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. My blood ran cold. The document listed ownership interests connected to Genesis Logistics. Not complete ownership, partial ownership. But one name appeared among the records. A name I knew better than anyone. Kendra Williams. My younger sister. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Connor wasn't at the center. Terrence wasn't at the center. Somehow, impossibly, my sister was connected to the company receiving the money. And if Kendra had been involved since the beginning, then the betrayal running through my life was far deeper than a marriage falling apart. It meant my own family might have been part of the lie from the very start. Seeing Kendra's name connected to Genesis Logistics felt worse than discovering Terrence's lies. A husband can betray you and remain outside the bloodline. A sister is different. A sister is supposed to know the rooms you cried in before anyone else did. Kendra knew how many nights I had sat on bathroom floors after failed treatments. She knew how badly I wanted a child. She knew how carefully I had built my career because I never wanted to depend on any man for survival. And somehow her name was now tied to the company receiving suspicious money from a church fund my husband controlled. For several minutes I couldn't speak. Marcus didn't rush me. He just stood beside the whiteboard while I stared at the document on the laptop screen, reading my sister's name again and again as if repetition might make it disappear. It didn't. Could it be a mistake? I asked finally. Marcus's face told me the answer before he spoke. Possible. Not likely. Could Connor have used her name without her knowing? Also possible. He paused. But if we're being honest, that depends on how much your sister signs without reading. I wanted to defend her. I really did. Kendra could be selfish, spoiled, and cruel when she wanted to be, but I still wanted there to be a line she would never cross. Then I remembered the ballroom. Her silence. The way she sat beside my mother while Terrence destroyed me. She hadn't looked confused. She hadn't looked heartbroken. She had looked uncomfortable, like someone waiting for a difficult scene to end. The next morning, Marcus and I shifted the entire investigation toward Kendra. We pulled property records, vehicle registrations, business filings, travel patterns, and social media archives. At first, what we found looked like the ordinary excess of a wealthy couple trying too hard to prove they were wealthy. Designer bags, luxury dinners, beach vacations, a Porsche, a Hilton Head property, expensive private school donations even though they had no children. But numbers tell stories, photographs cannot. The timing of the purchases mattered. 3 years earlier, Kendra and Connor's lifestyle changed sharply. Not gradually, sharply. Before that, their spending matched Connor's income closely enough to be believable. After that, money appeared everywhere. Cars, jewelry, real estate deposits, country club upgrades, political fundraisers. Large charitable donations made in Kendra's name to improve her social standing. This doesn't look like normal wealth creep, Marcus said. I knew exactly what he meant. Normal lifestyle inflation follows income. This followed something else. Something hidden. By late afternoon, we identified several payments from Genesis-linked accounts that appeared near major purchases by Kendra and Connor. Nothing direct enough to prove theft yet, but enough to tighten the circle. A payment moved through a vendor. A consulting fee disappeared into another entity. A luxury expense appeared days later. The pattern repeated too cleanly to ignore. Then Marcus found the first emotional piece of evidence. A series of photographs from a private winter trip to Aspen. Kendra had posted carefully cropped images from that weekend 3 years ago. I remembered them. Everyone did. My mother had praised her for days, talking about how Connor knew how to treat a wife properly. At the time, I was recovering from another failed fertility cycle, and Terrence had comforted me by saying our blessings would come in God's timing. I had believed him. Now Marcus placed the travel records beside the church ledger. My stomach turned. The dates matched several suspicious withdrawals from the building fund. The amounts weren't vague either. Private aviation, luxury resort deposit, high-end dining, spa services. Everything lined up too closely. Maybe Connor paid for it, I said. But even I heard how weak that sounded. Marcus opened another file. Then why did the money move from a Genesis-linked vendor 48 hours before the trip? I had no answer. The betrayal was beginning to develop texture. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was memories being rewritten. That Aspen trip I once envied had not been proof that Kendra married well. It may have been funded by church members giving sacrificial donations from paychecks they could barely stretch. Retired women, single mothers, factory workers. People who trusted Terrence when he stood at the pulpit and promised their money was building something holy. The anger that moved through me then was different. Not personal, moral. There is a special kind of evil in stealing from people's faith. That evening, I called Eleanor Pierce, the major donor whose name appeared repeatedly in the restricted donor records. I didn't expect her to answer. She did. Her voice was sharp, elderly, and impatient. "Who is this?" I introduced myself carefully and explained that I was reviewing historical financial activity connected to Greater Light's expansion campaign. I did not accuse anyone. I did not reveal confidential details. I simply asked whether she had ever received complete construction updates for the project she helped fund. Silence followed. Then she said, "I received what Pastor Brooks's office sent me. And did those updates include vendor-level spending?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No." Her tone changed. "Should they have?" I chose my words carefully. "For the amount you donated, I would have expected detailed reporting." Eleanor didn't speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice had lost its impatience. "Young woman, how much trouble is my money in?" I looked across the table at Marcus. "I don't know yet." That was the truth. "But I think you deserve answers." Before ending the call, Eleanor said something that made my pulse quicken. "Then perhaps you should speak to the woman who used to handle the donor packets." "Who?" "Nadine." My hand tightened around the phone. "Nadine who?" "Nadine Walker. She worked in the finance office before she left suddenly last year." Marcus began searching the name before I even hung up. Within minutes, he found her. Former financial coordinator at Greater Light, resigned without public explanation. No current LinkedIn updates, no social media activity in nearly a year. People disappear online for many reasons. Fear is one of them. It took Marcus less than 2 hours to locate a current phone number. I called. No answer. I left a careful message. 10 minutes later, my phone rang from a blocked number. A woman whispered, "Stop calling me." My pulse jumped. "Nadine? I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave this alone. I think money from the expansion fund was diverted." The silence on the line changed. I could hear her breathing. "You don't know what you're saying. Then tell me I'm wrong." She didn't. "Nadine, people donated because they trusted the church." Her voice cracked slightly. "I know." Those 2 words told me everything. She knew something. Maybe not all of it, but enough to be afraid. "Meet me," I said. "No." "Then help me understand." Another long pause. "If I talk, they'll ruin me." "Who?" Silence. Then she whispered, "All of them." The call disconnected. I sat frozen with the phone in my hand. All of them. Not Terrence. Not Connor. All of them. For the first time, I understood that this conspiracy might not have one mastermind. It might be a circle of people, each protecting their own piece of the rot. Terrence protecting his pulpit, Connor protecting his career, Kendra protecting her lifestyle, my mother protecting the family brand. And somewhere inside that circle was the reason they had needed to destroy me before I started asking questions. The next morning, Nadine sent one text. No greeting, no explanation, just an address and a time. Marcus insisted on coming with me. We met her in a nearly empty diner outside Decatur just after sunrise. She looked nothing like the polished finance coordinator pictured in old church directories. She looked exhausted, older than her age, frightened in a way people become when fear has lived in their body too long. She didn't sit until she had checked every window twice. "I can't be seen with you," she said. "Then why come?" She stared at me. "Because I watched what they did to you at the anniversary dinner." My chest tightened. "You were there?" She nodded. "And I knew why they were doing it." The diner seemed to go silent around us. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Nadine placed a small envelope on the table but kept her hand on top of it. "Genesis Logistics isn't just a vendor," she whispered. "It's where the overflow goes." "What overflow?" I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "Money they can't explain." Then she slid the envelope across the table. Inside were copies of internal donor reports, vendor approvals, and one email chain with names I recognized immediately. Terrence, Connor, Kendra, Vivian, my mother. My own mother had not merely defended them after the fact. Her name appeared in the coordination chain. Nadine watched my face change. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I couldn't answer. Because the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who watched me get thrown out in disgrace, had been included in communications tied to the money they were hiding. Nadine stood to leave, then stopped. "There's one more thing." My voice barely worked. "What?" She looked toward the windows again, terrified. "Kendra isn't just on the paperwork." My blood went cold. "What does that mean?" Nadine's voice dropped to a whisper. Genesis was created for her. Genesis was created for her. Those 4 words followed me all the way back to Atlanta. Nadine refused to say anything more inside the diner. She was already terrified and clearly regretting how much she had revealed. Before leaving, she repeated the same warning 3 separate times. Be careful. Not because of Connor. Not because of Terrence. Because once people realized I understood Genesis was never a real operating company, they would know exactly where my investigation was heading. Marcus spent most of the drive analyzing the documents Nadine had handed us. I spent most of it staring out the window, trying to understand how my younger sister became part of something this large. Kendra had always loved attention. Expensive things, status, validation. But fraud? Money laundering? Stealing from church donors? That didn't fit the person I thought I knew. Then again, neither had watching me get publicly destroyed without saying a word. Maybe I didn't know her at all. Back at the suite, Marcus spread Nadine's evidence across the conference table. For the next 6 hours, we reconstructed the timeline from the beginning. The picture that emerged was ugly. 3 years earlier, Genesis Logistics appeared almost overnight. Within months, it started receiving contracts connected to church expansion projects. Shortly afterward, large consulting payments began flowing through accounts tied to Connor's investment network. Then came the luxury purchases, the vacations, the property acquisitions, the lifestyle upgrades. Every road led back to Genesis. Every road eventually touched Kendra. Around 4 o'clock, Marcus pointed to a line item buried deep inside one of the internal reports. There. I followed his finger. A payment authorization. Then another. Then another. The approvals were connected to a board subcommittee responsible for reviewing vendor relationships. One name appeared repeatedly beside the approval chain. Vivian Brooks. My mother. I closed my eyes. Part of me still wanted there to be an innocent explanation. Maybe she didn't understand the financial details. Maybe she signed paperwork without reviewing it. Maybe she trusted people she shouldn't have trusted. Then I remembered something Nadine had said. Vivian wasn't copied on updates after the fact. She was included in planning communications before approvals occurred. That changed everything. You cannot accidentally participate in planning meetings. The realization hurt more than I expected. My husband betraying me was devastating. Discovering my own mother might have helped build the lie felt worse. Around 6 o'clock, Marcus received confirmation on another request. Kendra wasn't merely listed on Genesis paperwork. She was the majority owner. 82%. I stared at the screen in disbelief. That's impossible. Marcus shook his head. No, that's deliberate. The distinction mattered. Shell companies are often hidden behind layers of ownership. Genesis wasn't hidden very well at all. That meant one of 2 things. Either the people involved were incredibly careless, or they believed nobody would ever look. Considering how effectively Terrence controlled the narrative around the church, the second explanation seemed more likely. They never expected scrutiny. They certainly never expected scrutiny from me. That evening, I made a decision Marcus immediately hated. I wanted to see Kendra, not confront her, observe her. Sometimes people reveal more when they don't know they're being watched. Marcus argued against it for nearly 20 minutes before reluctantly agreeing to accompany me. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days later, my mother invited me to a Sunday brunch at a private country club. The invitation itself was suspicious. Since the ballroom incident, she had barely spoken to me except through criticism and guilt. Now, suddenly, she wanted a family conversation. Marcus believed it was a trap. I agreed. That didn't mean I wasn't going. The brunch took place in a private dining room overlooking the golf course. When I arrived, my mother was already seated beside Kendra. Connor sat across from them. Terrence arrived 10 minutes later. The sight of him still hurt, but something had changed. For the first time since our marriage collapsed, I wasn't looking at him as my husband. I was looking at him as a subject of investigation. The difference was powerful. My mother smiled tightly. Thank you for coming. Nobody hugged me. Nobody apologized. Nobody asked how I was feeling. The performance began immediately. They wanted me to sign a confidentiality agreement related to the divorce. They wanted me to accept a settlement payment. They wanted me to stop discussing church finances. Connor presented the proposal like a business negotiation. Terrence presented it like compassion. My mother presented it like family unity. Only Kendra remained mostly silent. The more they talked, the more obvious the strategy became. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to contain me. Every sentence carried the same hidden message. Take the money, sign the papers, walk away, forget what happened. The offer itself was insulting. $10,000. After emptying my accounts, after destroying my reputation, after attempting to end my career. $10,000. I almost laughed. Then something unexpected happened. Terrence stepped away to take a call. Connor followed moments later. My mother excused herself to greet another member. For the first time, Kendra and I sat alone. Neither of us spoke initially. Then she surprised me. You should take the deal. I looked at her carefully. Why? She avoided eye contact. Because this isn't a fight you can win. The statement carried far more fear than confidence. What exactly am I fighting? Kendra finally looked at me. For a brief moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Guilt. Real guilt. Then it vanished. Just sign the papers. Before I could respond, her iPad screen illuminated beside her. An incoming email notification appeared. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed, but one word immediately caught my attention. Genesis. My pulse accelerated. Kendra reacted a fraction too slowly, long enough for me to see the subject line. Genesis Quarterly, Distribution Summary. She grabbed the device instantly, but the damage was done. Distribution. Not consulting. Not operations. Distribution. My mind began connecting pieces immediately. Genesis wasn't functioning like a normal vendor. It was functioning like a vehicle. A place where money arrived before being redistributed elsewhere. Kendra realized I had seen something. Her face lost color. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she whispered 3 words that changed everything. You need to stop. Not, you're wrong. Not, you misunderstand. Stop. Because she knew exactly what I was uncovering. Moments later, Connor returned and the conversation ended. But it didn't matter. The brunch had already given me what I came for. Confirmation. Kendra wasn't a victim. Kendra wasn't a bystander. Kendra was protecting Genesis because Genesis belonged to her. That night, Marcus and I obtained the final ownership records. When the documents arrived, neither of us spoke for several seconds. The evidence was undeniable. Genesis Logistics had never been Connor's company. It had never been Terrence's company. It had been created in Kendra's name from the very beginning. My younger sister wasn't standing near the center of the operation. She was standing directly inside it. For 3 years, I believed my younger sister was simply spoiled, selfish, sometimes cruel, occasionally reckless, but ultimately harmless. The ownership records sitting on my laptop destroyed that illusion completely. Genesis Logistics belonged to Kendra, not partially, not indirectly, not through some complicated corporate structure she barely understood. She was the majority owner. Her signature appeared on formation documents. Her name appeared on banking authorizations. Her name appeared on annual filings. The company at the center of everything had been built around her from the beginning. I stared at the screen long after Marcus left that night. Out of everyone involved, Kendra's betrayal felt the most personal. Terrence had married into my life. Connor had always been his friend first. My mother spent years choosing appearances over honesty. But Kendra was my sister. She knew every insecurity I carried. She knew every sacrifice I made. She knew how hard I worked to build a career independent of anyone else's approval. Yet somehow she had sat across from me at family dinners, smiled in photographs, attended holidays, and watched me get publicly destroyed while protecting a company tied to millions of dollars in suspicious transactions. Sleep never came. Instead, I spent the entire night reviewing Genesis records again. Near dawn, I found something Marcus had overlooked, not because he missed it, because he wasn't looking for family history. One of the earliest Genesis banking forms listed an emergency contact. Vivian Brooks. My mother. I leaned back slowly. At this point, surprise had almost disappeared. Every new discovery simply confirmed what I already feared. Genesis was never Kendra's independent project. It was a family operation. The only question remaining was who designed it. The next morning, Marcus arrived, carrying breakfast and another stack of documents. The moment he saw my face, he knew I had found something. 20 minutes later, after reviewing the emergency contact records, he nodded slowly. That answers one question. Which one? Whether your mother knew from the beginning. I looked away. Some truths stop hurting because they become predictable. Others hurt more every time they're confirmed. Around noon, Marcus received a response from one of his financial contacts. A former compliance officer who specialized in nonprofit oversight had reviewed several of the transactions connected to Genesis. His conclusion was blunt. This doesn't look like random misuse. Marcus read the message aloud. It looks structured. Structured. That word mattered. Random fraud happens when people steal opportunities. Structured fraud happens when people build systems. Suddenly, Genesis made more sense. The church wasn't funding a fake company by accident. Someone had designed a process where money entered legitimate projects, passed through approved vendors, and emerged somewhere else. The system had survived for years because multiple people played different roles. Connor managed complexity. Kendra provided ownership. Vivian provided credibility. The only piece still missing was Terrence. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Again, my pulse accelerated immediately. I answered without speaking. A woman's voice came through. Nadine. You need to stop looking at Genesis. Why? Silence. Then a frustrated laugh. Because you're still looking at the wrong thing. My stomach tightened. Genesis is receiving the money. Exactly. Her voice sharpened. Receiving it, not creating it. The statement hit me immediately. We had become so focused on Genesis that we stopped asking where the money originated. Genesis was a destination, not the source. Then what's the source? I asked. No answer. Nadine. Another pause. Look at the donor campaigns. The line disconnected. Marcus was already moving toward the whiteboard before I lowered the phone. We spent the next several hours mapping major fundraising efforts against Genesis payments. The pattern appeared almost immediately. Every major spike in Genesis activity followed large donor campaigns, building expansions, youth outreach initiatives, community development projects, scholarship funds. The public purpose changed. The money flow remained remarkably similar. Then I saw it. One campaign generated more activity than all the others combined. The Legacy Growth Initiative. 3 years earlier. The same year everything changed. My pulse accelerated. I remembered that campaign. Terrence talked about it constantly. He called it the Future of Greater Light Fellowship. The initiative raised extraordinary amounts from donors who believed they were helping build long-term community programs. If Nadine was right, that campaign might have supplied the fuel for everything that followed. Marcus immediately requested additional records. By evening, the first batch arrived. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw the numbers. The Legacy Growth Initiative had raised significantly more money than publicly reported. Not slightly more, millions more. Yet internal summaries and public disclosures didn't match. Some funds appeared in one report and vanished from another. Others moved through intermediary entities before disappearing entirely. The scale shocked even Marcus. This is bigger than I thought. I agreed. Much bigger. We weren't looking at isolated theft anymore. We were looking at a long-term mechanism. A system capable of moving enormous amounts without attracting immediate attention. Around 7 o'clock, another piece finally clicked into place. I pulled up photographs from the anniversary banquet, then church fundraising events. Then community galas. One face kept appearing beside Terrence. Connor. Another face kept appearing beside Connor. Kendra. Every major financial campaign, every major donor dinner, every major expansion announcement. The same circle, the same relationships, the same smiles. Suddenly I realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. Connor handled money. Kendra owned Genesis. But Terrence controlled trust. Every dollar entering the system arrived because people believed him, because people trusted him, because people saw him as a pastor, a shepherd, a spiritual leader. Without Terrence, donors never contribute. Without Connor, money isn't moved. Without Kendra, Genesis doesn't exist. They weren't operating in a hierarchy. They were operating as partners. The realization made my blood run cold. For weeks I had been trying to determine who sat at the top. The answer was none of them. The structure only worked because all three benefited. Around midnight, Marcus finally received the records he had requested from the Legacy Growth Initiative. He opened the first file, then the second, then the third. With each page, his expression darkened. Aaliyah. I looked up. What? He turned the laptop toward me. Several emails appeared on the screen. Internal communications tied to the original fundraising campaign. The sender's name sat at the top of every message. Terrence Brooks. My pulse quickened. Then I saw the recipients. Connor Williams, Kendra Williams, Vivian Brooks. Nadine had been right. The source wasn't Genesis. The source was the campaign itself. But the final email contained something even worse. Attached to the message was a strategic planning memo discussing future risks, specifically legal risks, donor scrutiny, audit exposure, financial controls. The memo ended with one sentence that made my blood run cold. In the event of future complications, contingency measures should focus on A, B, whose professional credentials may become useful if regulatory questions arise. I read the line twice, then a third time. A, B, my initials. 3 years ago, while I was struggling through fertility treatments and trying to save my marriage, they had already discussed me inside risk management planning documents. They weren't just hiding money, they had been planning around me for years. And suddenly the vasectomy, the divorce strategy, the destroyed reputation, and the public accusation all looked very different. They weren't reactions. They were contingency plans. And I had just discovered proof that my downfall had been discussed long before I ever announced I was pregnant. The sentence from the contingency memo refused to leave my head. In the event of future complications, contingency measures should focus on A, B, whose professional credentials may become useful if regulatory questions arise. 3 years ago, while I was trying to save my marriage and build a family, someone had already identified me as a future problem. Not a wife, not a daughter, not a sister. A problem. That realization changed everything. Up until now, I believed Terrence's betrayal was triggered by my pregnancy. I thought the public humiliation, the divorce papers, and the destruction of my reputation happened because something had gone wrong recently. The memo proved otherwise. They had been preparing for me long before I announced I was pregnant. The pregnancy hadn't started the attack. It had accelerated a plan that already existed. The next morning, Marcus arrived before sunrise carrying a box of records from one of Jamal's private archives. Most of the material related to donor activity and corporate filings. Then he handed me a smaller folder marked Medical Timeline. My pulse immediately quickened. What's this? Marcus sat down slowly. Something Jamal was tracking near the end. I opened the folder. The first page contained dates from fertility clinics, appointment records, treatment schedules, insurance authorizations. My stomach tightened. Why was Jamal looking at this? Marcus pointed toward a highlighted section. Because he believed your pregnancy might be connected to whatever they're hiding. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I started reading. 3 years earlier, around the same period Genesis was created, Terrence's behavior toward our fertility treatments had changed dramatically. At the time, I thought he was simply becoming frustrated. Fertility struggles destroy a lot of marriages. The emotional pressure is relentless. But now the timeline looked different. Terrence began missing appointments, delaying procedures, avoiding conversations about future treatments. Then, I saw something else. Approximately 4 months after the alleged vasectomy, he had quietly stopped attending consultations altogether. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. Marcus nodded. Exactly. If Terrence truly underwent a vasectomy and intended never to have children, why continue participating in fertility planning afterward? Why pretend? Why waste time and money? Unless he needed me to believe we were still trying. The thought sent a chill through me. Around noon, Marcus and I visited my former fertility clinic. Not because we expected immediate answers, because we needed records before someone else tried to make them disappear. The clinic director knew me well. She remembered every failed cycle, every setback, every hopeful phone call. After explaining the legal situation, she agreed to help us review archived files. What we found shocked me. Multiple treatment plans listed Terrence as an active participant long after the date he claimed to have had a vasectomy. Laboratory approvals carried his electronic consent. Financial authorizations carried his signature. Follow-up recommendations were addressed to both of us. He knew about all of this, I whispered. The director looked confused. Of course he did. My pulse accelerated. You're certain? Aaliyah, we couldn't have moved forward without his authorization. The room suddenly felt smaller. If Terrence truly believed the baby couldn't be his, why participate in fertility planning? Why sign documents? Why authorize procedures? None of it fit his public story. Then the director said something that made my heart stop. Actually, there was one meeting that stands out. I looked up immediately. What meeting? She opened an archived note. About 14 months ago. You missed the appointment because of a work emergency. I vaguely remembered it. A major audit deadline had forced me to cancel. Terrence attended alone. Every nerve in my body went alert. Alone? The director nodded. He wanted clarification regarding embryo storage and future transfer options. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Embryo storage. Future transfer. Those were not the questions of a man planning to expose his wife as an adulterer. Those were the questions of a man planning for future pregnancy. Marcus looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us needed to say it. Terrence knew. He had known all along. Back at the hotel suite, we requested additional records. By evening, the final confirmation arrived. 14 months earlier, Terrence signed documentation acknowledging the existence of viable embryos created using both our genetic material. His signature appeared on every page. His initials appeared beside procedural approvals. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no confusion. The evidence was devastating. When I became pregnant, Terrence already knew there was a medically documented pathway for that pregnancy to occur. The public accusation at the ballroom wasn't ignorance. It wasn't confusion. It was a lie. A deliberate lie. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt genuine rage. Not sadness, not grief, rage. Because he hadn't simply attacked me. He had attacked our child. He had stood before hundreds of people and branded his own unborn baby a fraud to protect himself. Around 7 o'clock, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Marcus finally obtained travel records connected to Terrence. Most looked ordinary. Church conferences, leadership retreats, donor meetings. Then one pattern emerged. Repeated visits to Charlotte, North Carolina over a 2-year period. The trips were short, poorly documented, often disguised as ministry travel. Yet expense reports showed no corresponding church events. "What's in Charlotte?" I asked. Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Good question." 2 hours later, we had an answer. My stomach dropped when I saw the name. Danielle Mercer. Terrence wasn't traveling for ministry. He was traveling for a woman. The records weren't enough to prove an affair yet, but they established a connection. Hotel stays, restaurant charges, private transportation, repeated contact. The timing made everything worse. Several trips occurred during periods when Terrence was supposedly focused on fertility treatments and family planning. While I was injecting medications, attending appointments, and praying for a child, he was quietly building another life. The betrayal felt almost physical. Then Marcus found something even worse. One of Danielle's social media accounts had never been fully deleted. Most photographs were gone, but several comments remained. Among them sat a message from Terrence written 18 months earlier. Reading it made me sick. "Soon we won't have to hide." I stared at the screen, again and again. Soon we won't have to hide. Not if. Not maybe. Soon. As though a plan already existed. As though he expected obstacles to disappear. Suddenly the contingency memo looked different. The divorce strategy looked different. The vasectomy looked different. My pregnancy looked different. What if Terrence wasn't trying to escape a cheating wife? What if he was trying to remove the wife standing between him and the future he already wanted? Near midnight, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something told me not to. When I answered, she sounded unusually nervous. "Aaliyah, we need to talk." I leaned back slowly. "About what?" Silence. Then a sentence I never expected to hear. "There's something Terrence never wanted you to know." Every muscle in my body tightened. For the first time since the ballroom, my mother sounded afraid. truly afraid. And whatever she was about to tell me sounded important enough to make her risk turning against the people she had protected for years. My mother's call kept me awake for most of the night. For years, Vivian Brooks had defended Terrence more aggressively than she defended her own daughter. She protected his reputation. She repeated his version of events. She watched me get publicly destroyed without intervening. Now suddenly she was afraid. That alone told me something had changed. The problem was that fear does not automatically create honesty. People often tell partial truths when they believe a situation is collapsing. By morning, Marcus agreed with my concern. If she talks, he said, assume she's protecting herself. It was good advice. The woman who raised me didn't suddenly become trustworthy because she sounded nervous. Still, if she knew something important, I couldn't ignore it. We met that afternoon at a small cafe nearly 40 minutes outside Atlanta. My mother arrived wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She checked the parking lot twice before entering. I had never seen her behave like that. Vivian Brooks was the type of woman who normally walked into every room as though she owned it. Today, she looked like someone trying not to be recognized. She sat across from me without ordering anything. For nearly 30 seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. You should have left when Terrence asked. I almost laughed. Even now, she couldn't begin with an apology. Good to see you too, Mom. She ignored the comment. You don't understand how dangerous this has become. Marcus sat at a nearby table pretending not to listen. My mother didn't know who he was. Then explain it, I said. Her eyes moved around the cafe. Not here. Then why ask to meet? She exhaled slowly. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked. Older. Weaker. Fear ages people quickly. Finally, she leaned forward. Terrence knew the baby was his. Every sound inside the cafe disappeared. I stared at her. My pulse hammered in my ears. Even though Marcus and I had already uncovered evidence pointing in that direction, hearing the words spoken aloud felt different. Real. Final. Say that again. My mother swallowed. He knew. Rage moved through me so fast it was almost dizzying. Then he lied. She nodded once. Yes. He stood in front of 300 people and lied. Another nod. Yes. He called his own child a fraud. My mother's eyes dropped to the table. Yes. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. Anger without information was useless. Why? I asked. Why would he do that? She hesitated. Then the old Vivian returned. The calculating version. The version that measured every sentence. Because he believed there were larger risks. Larger risks. Not guilt, not shame. Risks. The answer made me sick. What risks? My mother shook her head. I don't know everything. That was probably true. But she knew more than she was admitting. I could feel it. Then she made a mistake. Connor thought it was necessary. My pulse accelerated immediately. Connor? She froze, just for a second, but it was enough. What does Connor have to do with my pregnancy? Silence. Then she stood abruptly. I shouldn't have come. I rose too. Sit down. For the first time in my life, my voice made her stop. You don't get to drop that sentence and leave. My mother looked genuinely frightened. Not of me, of something else. Finally, she sat. Connor believed the pregnancy created exposure. Marcus later described that moment as the first crack in the wall. At the time, I only felt confusion. Exposure to what? A child doesn't create financial exposure unless money is involved. Assets, inheritance, ownership, liability. My mind immediately shifted toward the investigation. Exposure for Genesis? I asked. She looked away. Wrong move. People look away when answers get too close. Mom. Silence. Mom. Finally, she whispered, some things were supposed to stay temporary. Temporary. Another strange word. Another accidental clue. Before I could push further, her phone rang. The color drained from her face. She stared at the screen but didn't answer. Then she stood. I have to go. Who was that? No answer. She turned and walked out of the cafe. Through the window, I watched her leave faster than I had ever seen her move. Marcus joined me moments later. Well? I repeated everything word for word. He listened carefully. Then he said something I hadn't considered. What if the baby isn't the threat? I frowned. What do you mean? Marcus sat down. What if the documentation surrounding the baby is the threat? The idea hit me immediately. Embryos, fertility records, medical authorizations, signed acknowledgments, Terrence's signatures. If federal investigators ever started exactly viewing timelines, those records would prove he knowingly lied at the ballroom. More importantly, they would prove he had motive to discredit you before questions started being asked. The pieces began moving together in my head. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Nadine. Meet me. Urgent. Attached was an address. 30 minutes later, Marcus and I arrived at a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Nadine was already waiting. She looked worse than before. Sleep-deprived, agitated, terrified. The moment we entered the unit, she locked the door behind us. They're panicking. My pulse quickened. Who? All of them. She handed me a cardboard file box. Inside sat years of copied records she had quietly removed before leaving Greater Light. Board notes, approval packets, internal emails, meeting summaries. Why keep these? I asked. Her voice trembled. Insurance. Smart. Very smart. People who fear powerful organizations often keep proof. We spent the next hour reviewing documents. Most strengthened what we already knew. Then Marcus found an email chain dated 18 months earlier. The sender was Connor. The recipients were Terrence, Kendra, Vivian, and 2 attorneys. The subject line read, Long-term exposure assessment. My pulse accelerated. Marcus opened the attachment. Several pages appeared. Risk categories, financial vulnerabilities, donor scrutiny, regulatory concerns. Then one section stopped all of us cold. Family variables. Under that heading sat my name. Beside it was a notation. CPA. Access to records. Potential future issue. The date mattered. 18 months earlier. Long before my pregnancy. Long before the ballroom. Long before the divorce strategy. They had already identified me as a threat. The room went silent. Then Nadine whispered the sentence that changed everything. The pregnancy wasn't what scared them. I looked up slowly. Then what did? Her eyes filled with tears. You finally becoming a mother. I stared at her. The statement made no sense. Nadine shook her head. You don't understand. Every time fertility treatments failed, Terrence delayed decisions, delayed plans, delayed transfers, delayed changes. My pulse hammered. Why? She swallowed hard. Because once you had a child, you would have started asking questions about inheritance, trusts, beneficiary designations, and long-term family assets. The room suddenly felt colder. My mind raced through everything. Future planning, estate structures, beneficiary reviews, financial disclosures, the exact areas where hidden money becomes difficult to hide. Terrence wasn't afraid of the baby. He was afraid of the future conversations the baby would force. Then Nadine delivered the final blow. And there was something else. Every nerve in my body tightened. What? Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Danielle wasn't the only woman. For several seconds, nobody moved. My stomach turned. What are you talking about? Nadine looked directly at me. Connor knew about Danielle because Connor helped pay for her. The room went silent, because suddenly this wasn't just fraud anymore. It wasn't even just betrayal. Connor and Terrence weren't merely business partners. They had been covering for each other's secrets for years. And if Connor was paying for Terrence's mistress, then whatever tied them together was far stronger than money alone. Connor helped pay for Danielle. Out of everything Nadine revealed inside that storage unit, that was the statement I couldn't stop replaying in my head. Not because Terrence had a mistress. By now, infidelity almost felt predictable. What mattered was the partnership behind it. Affairs are usually hidden from business associates. Connor didn't hide this one. He financed it. That meant their relationship operated on a level far deeper than friendship. People don't spend years protecting each other's secrets unless both sides have something to lose. When Marcus and I returned to the suite that night, we stopped focusing on individual betrayals and started looking at the network as a whole. For weeks, every discovery had pointed toward the same conclusion. Terrence, Connor, Kendra, and my mother weren't separate problems. They were a system. Each person protected the others because exposure for one threatened exposure for all. The question was no longer whether fraud existed. The question was how large it had become. Around midnight, Marcus received a response from one of his federal contacts. The message wasn't official. It wasn't even something admissible in court, but it contained a warning. Several entities connected to Connor's investment network had already attracted regulatory attention. Not enough for public action, not enough for arrests. Just enough for quiet observation. "They've been lucky," Marcus said. I stared at the screen. "Until now." He nodded. "Until now." The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of continuing to gather evidence passively, I decided to go on offense. Not publicly, not recklessly, legally, strategically. If Connor and Terrence had spent years building a financial machine, then somewhere inside that machine existed leverage. Something valuable, something vulnerable, something they couldn't afford to lose. Marcus smiled when I explained the idea. "Now you're thinking like Jamal." For the first time since New York, hearing Jamal's name didn't hurt. It motivated me. We spent the next several days examining every corporate structure connected to Connor. Most were clean, boring, legitimate. But eventually we found something interesting. Connor had personally guaranteed several development loans tied to projects managed through Vanguard-related partnerships. Under normal circumstances, that wasn't unusual. Wealthy executives often guarantee deals. The problem was timing. Several guarantees overlapped directly with entities connected to Genesis. If those entities became subject to investigation, lenders could start asking uncomfortable questions, questions Connor would not want to answer. By Thursday evening, Marcus identified an even larger weakness. One of Connor's flagship investment vehicles depended heavily on confidence from outside investors. Confidence is fragile. Once serious allegations emerge, capital moves quickly, very quickly. I sat back in my chair. "So if the truth starts coming out?" Marcus finished the sentence. "The money starts running." The realization was powerful. For months, maybe years, Connor had acted like the smartest man in every room. Yet his empire relied on something surprisingly simple: trust. The same thing Terrence depended on from church members. The same thing Genesis depended on from donors. Remove trust, and the entire structure begins to wobble. Around noon the next day, another package arrived from Sterling's office in New York. Inside were additional materials Jamal had ordered, released only after certain investigative benchmarks were met. Apparently discovering Kendra's ownership of Genesis qualified. The package contained financial analyses Jamal commissioned shortly before his death. Some focused on donor activity, others focused on corporate relationships. One report immediately caught my attention. It mapped the personal wealth growth of everyone connected to Genesis over a 5-year period. The results were devastating. Connor's wealth exploded. Kendra's wealth exploded. Several associates experienced dramatic increases. One person stood out more than anyone else: Terrence. Publicly, Terrence lived like a successful pastor. Privately, the numbers suggested something very different. Assets had been purchased through trusts. Travel had been subsidized through third parties. Expenses had been absorbed by entities with no obvious connection to him. Someone had spent years helping him appear less wealthy than he really was. That wasn't accidental. That was strategy. Then I found the note Jamal attached to the report. It contained only one sentence: "Follow the assets, not the salaries." I smiled despite myself. Even after death, Jamal was still teaching me. The following week brought another breakthrough. Marcus obtained records connected to a luxury lake property outside Atlanta. Officially, the property belonged to an investment entity. Unofficially, everyone treated it like Connor's private retreat. Donor dinners happened there. Planning meetings happened there. Fundraising discussions happened there. Most importantly, internal calendars showed repeated gatherings involving Connor, Terrence, Kendra, and my mother. One meeting date immediately caught my attention. 18 months earlier. The same week the exposure assessment memo had been created. My pulse accelerated. We finally had evidence placing all 4 individuals together during the period they discussed me as a future risk. For the first time, the conspiracy felt less theoretical and more tangible. Real people, real meetings, real decisions, real victims. That night, Marcus and I built a complete timeline stretching across 3 years. The wall inside the suite was almost entirely covered now. Genesis, the donor campaigns, the luxury purchases, Danielle, the contingency planning, the fertility timeline, the vasectomy lie, every thread connected. Every path led back to the same small circle of people. Then my phone rang. Eleanor Pierce, the major donor. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded sharper than ever. Young woman, I hired my own accountants. My pulse quickened. And silence. Then a short laugh filled with disbelief. Your church friends have a problem. I stood immediately. What did they find? Eleanor didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something new. Anger. The numbers don't work. I closed my eyes. Finally, an independent source. Someone with resources. Someone they couldn't easily intimidate. How bad is it? Eleanor exhaled slowly. Bad enough that I'm contacting counsel. My heart pounded. This was bigger than one donor questioning paperwork. Eleanor Pierce had influence, connections, and money. If she started pulling threads, others would follow. The protective wall around Greater Light Fellowship could begin cracking from the outside. But before I could celebrate, Eleanor added one final sentence. And if I know this, they probably know it too. The meaning hit instantly. Connor, Terrence, Kendra. They were about to realize that scrutiny was no longer coming only from me. Wealthy donors were starting to ask questions. Investors were starting to ask questions. The timeline was accelerating. The pressure was building. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. 30 minutes after the call ended, Marcus received an alert from one of his monitoring systems. Someone had accessed records related to me again. Not public records this time. Medical records. My blood ran cold. Who? I asked. Marcus stared at the screen. His expression darkened. I don't know yet. He paused. But whoever it is just started looking at your pregnancy file. Suddenly the room felt very small. Because, after everything they had already done, there was only one reason to start digging into my medical records again. They weren't trying to defend themselves anymore. They were preparing a new attack. And this time, it wasn't aimed at my reputation. It was aimed at my child. The moment Marcus said someone had accessed my pregnancy file, every part of me went still. There are threats you can answer with evidence, threats you can answer with lawyers, and threats you can answer with silence. But when someone reaches for your child, something ancient wakes up inside you. I stood in the middle of the suite staring at the monitor while Marcus traced the access request through a chain of medical administration portals, and for the first time since the ballroom, I felt fear sharp enough to taste. Not fear for my reputation. Not fear for my license. Fear that the same people who had already used my pregnancy as a weapon were preparing to use my baby as the next battlefield. Can they alter anything? I asked. Marcus kept typing. Not easily. But they may not need to alter records. They may just need enough fragments to create a new story. I understood immediately. Terrence didn't have to prove I was lying. He only had to create confusion. A fertility treatment here. A missing appointment there. A medical authorization taken out of context. If they leaked the right pieces to the right people, they could make the public believe anything that had always been their gift. They didn't need truth. They needed narrative. Within an hour, Sterling had 3 attorneys on a secure call. By sunrise, emergency preservation letters had gone to the clinic, the state licensing board, my former employer, and the legal teams representing Greater Light Fellowship. Every relevant record was frozen. Every access log was preserved. Every unauthorized inquiry became evidence. Terrence wanted my medical history opened. Fine. I would open the parts he feared most. 2 days later, the Legacy Gala arrived. Terrence had turned the event into a coronation. The ballroom at the Biltmore glittered beneath chandeliers while Atlanta's political elite, wealthy donors, church elders, corporate executives, and television crews gathered to watch him receive formal recognition as the next bishop of Greater Light Fellowship. He had chosen the biggest possible stage to prove he survived the scandal he created. That was his mistake. Powerful men often confuse applause with protection. I arrived in a midnight blue gown with Marcus on my left, Sterling on my right, and my evidence locked across 3 encrypted drives already loaded into the audiovisual system by Omni Media. The production vendor Jamal's estate had quietly purchased 48 hours earlier. Terrence had wanted me in the room so I could watch him rise beyond my reach. Instead, I had bought the microphone, the cameras, the screens, and the silence between every word he was about to lose. The first person to see me was my mother. Vivian stood near the ballroom entrance wearing silver sequins and the same expression she used whenever she believed shame could control me. For 1 second, panic flashed across her face. Then she recovered and stepped into my path. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Tonight is too important for another one of your scenes." I looked at her calmly. "Then you should have taught your son-in-law not to create crimes that require public correction." Her face tightened. "You have no idea what you're doing." "No, Mom. For the first time, I know exactly what I'm doing." She reached for my arm. Marcus stepped forward, and she pulled back as if burned. I walked past her without another word. The ballroom was already full. Kendra sat near the front in emerald silk, glowing beneath the lights like she had never stolen a dollar or a husband in her life. Connor stood beside her, pale and restless, constantly checking his phone. Terrence waited near the stage in a white jacket trimmed with gold, smiling for cameras, accepting blessings, shaking hands. He looked holy. That was the most obscene part. He looked like a man people could trust. At 8 o'clock, the house lights dimmed. The choir rose. The crowd stood. Terrence walked to the podium as applause filled the room. He raised both hands, drinking in the worship like oxygen. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate faith, legacy, and the sacred responsibility of leadership." I sat in the front row and watched his eyes find me. His smile froze for half a second. Then he leaned closer to the microphone. "We also rise above false accusations, personal attacks, and the storm sent to test God's chosen servants." The audience applauded again. He was turning me into the enemy one last time. Perfect. Let him build the altar before the fire. Connor approached the stage to present the financial stewardship report. His hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. The first slide appeared behind him, showing a beautiful rendering of the sanctuary expansion that donations had supposedly funded. He cleared his throat. "Greater Light has always maintained the highest standards of transparency." That was my cue. I opened my phone and sent Marcus one word: "Execute." Connor's microphone died mid-breath. The screen behind him flickered once, then went black. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Then the first document appeared 50 feet wide behind the stage. Genesis Logistics Formation Records. Kendra Williams, majority owner. The room changed instantly. Confusion first, then whispers. Then the second slide appeared. Weekly transfers from Greater Light's Expansion Fund routed through vendor accounts into Genesis-linked entities. The amounts were circled in red. 50,000, 68,000, 81,000, over and over again. Connor turned toward the screen and went white. The third slide appeared before anyone could speak. The emergency wire transfer he had attempted after Vanguard's compliance freeze routed across state lines into an escrow account under his division. Beside it appeared his authenticated login, his IP address, and the timestamp. The words, "Federal Wire Fraud," appeared at the bottom in clean black text. The ballroom erupted. Investors stood. Church elders shouted. Reporters surged toward the stage. Connor grabbed the podium as though the wood could hold him upright. Then Terrence lunged for the dead microphone, screaming for someone to cut the screens. Omni Media did not cut the screens. The fourth slide appeared. Aspen photographs. Terrence and Kendra on a private chalet balcony. Terrence and Kendra beside an infinity pool. Terrence and Kendra kissing in a restaurant booth while a church donor event was happening the same weekend in Atlanta. Beside each photo appeared matched withdrawals from Greater Lights Building Fund, private aviation, resort deposit, dining, luxury transportation. Every dollar connected to money donated by people who believed they were building a sanctuary. The sound that came from the crowd was not a gasp. It was a wound opening. Thousands of small betrayals became one public truth. Kendra began sobbing immediately, but nobody comforted her. Connor turned on her with such naked rage that 2 security guards stepped between them. "You told me it was clean," he shouted. "You said Terrence had it handled." That sentence was a gift. Every camera captured it. Terrence looked like he might collapse. But I wasn't finished. I stood and walked toward the stage. An Omnimedia staffer handed me a wireless microphone as if we had rehearsed it. Because we had. The room slowly quieted when my voice came through the speakers. 7 days ago, someone connected to this circle accessed my pregnancy records. Terrence's head snapped toward me. 3 months ago, this man stood in front of many of you and claimed I was carrying another man's child because he had a secret vasectomy. I turned toward the screen. So let's correct that lie too. The next slide appeared: fertility clinic consent forms, Terrence's signature, embryo storage acknowledgement, transfer authorization, procedure approval, dates highlighted. The crowd went silent. Not confused this time. Horrified. Terrence knew this child was his, I said. My voice did not shake. He signed the medical consent forms. He knew about the embryos. He knew about the transfer. He knew before I ever walked into that anniversary dinner with an ultrasound photo. His public accusation was not confusion, it was strategy. Terrence tried to speak, but nothing came out. His mouth opened and closed like a man drowning on dry land. I stepped closer. He used a private medical procedure from 3 years ago to frame me for adultery, destroy my credibility, and remove the one person in his household trained to follow missing money. The front row of elders turned toward him as if seeing him for the first time. Bishop Hayes, the man scheduled to bless Terrence's elevation, slowly removed the ceremonial stole from the chair beside him and held it in his hands. Then I turned toward my mother. She stood near the aisle, frozen, one hand covering her mouth. And Vivian Brooks knew enough to choose silence. The screen changed again. Internal emails. Risk planning. Donor exposure discussions. My initials. A.B. Family variables. Vivian copied on the chain. Planning communications before the ballroom humiliation. Not after. Before. My mother's knees visibly weakened. Mom, I said, and the word hurt more than I expected. You watched them make me the scapegoat because protecting the family brand mattered more than protecting your daughter. She began shaking her head, whispering something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. The room had already heard enough. Then the final package appeared on screen. Nadine's sworn statement, Eleanor Pierce's donor complaint, Genesis distribution summaries, Vanguard compliance notices, fertility confirmations, and the complete timeline showing the same 3-year window connecting the vasectomy, Genesis, donor diversions, Kendra's ownership, Connor's transfers, Terrence's affair, and the contingency plan against me. One story, one system, one empire built on faith, fraud, and family betrayal. At the back of the ballroom, the doors opened. Federal agents entered without drama, which somehow made it more terrifying. Dark suits, badges, calm faces, no shouting, no cinematic chaos, just authority. Connor was first. 2 agents approached him, showed paperwork, and escorted him away as his legs nearly gave out. Kendra screamed his name until another agent handed her a document and her voice died in her throat. Terrence backed away from the podium, shaking his head, still trying to perform innocence, but Bishop Hayes stepped in front of him. The old bishop looked devastated. You will not touch that microphone again. Then, in front of every donor, every elder, every camera, he removed the gold stole from Terrence's shoulders before it ever reached him. You are suspended from all pastoral authority pending investigation. The applause that followed was not celebration. It was judgment. Terrence looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time I saw the thing I had waited months to see. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. He finally understood that the woman he threw out with $4 had walked back and owning the stage, the evidence, and the truth. My mother pushed through the crowd toward me as agents moved around the room. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her silver dress glittered under the lights like broken glass. Aaliyah, please, she cried. Don't let them destroy us. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman had raised me to protect image, obey silence, and call suffering dignity. She had watched me lose everything and asked me to disappear politely. Now she wanted mercy because consequences had arrived at her table. You had a daughter, I said quietly into the microphone, and the whole ballroom heard it. You chose a brand. Her face collapsed. I turned away before she could touch me. Behind me, reporters shouted questions. Elders demanded audits. Donors called attorneys. Federal agents collected devices. Terrence stood alone beneath the massive screen showing his own signature on the IVF consent forms. The lie that made him powerful had become the proof that destroyed him. As I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parted without anyone asking. Not because they pitied me, because they finally understood who had been telling the truth. Outside, the Atlanta night was warm and loud with sirens. I placed one hand over my stomach and took my first full breath in months. The public execution Terrence planned for me had finally happened. He just hadn't realized he was building it for himself. The morning after the Legacy Gala felt strangely quiet. For months, every day had begun with fear, suspicion, or another piece of bad news. That morning, I woke up and heard nothing. No threatening messages, no emergency calls from attorneys, no anonymous warnings, no new accusations on social media, just silence. The kind of silence that only appears after a storm finally runs out of strength. I stood beside the hotel window watching the Atlanta skyline slowly brighten beneath the sunrise and placed my hand over my stomach. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, I allowed myself to believe my child might actually have a future untouched by the people who spent years trying to control ours. 3 days later, the consequences began arriving publicly. Connor Williams was formally charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and financial misconduct connected to donor funds and investment activities. Several former associates immediately began cooperating with investigators. The man who spent years believing he was the smartest person in every room suddenly discovered that intelligence means very little when everyone starts saving themselves. Within a week, 2 executives from Vanguard agreed to testify. Within 2 weeks, additional financial records surfaced. Every attempt Connor made to protect himself only exposed more of the system he helped build. Kendra's collapse happened differently. Criminal charges were only part of her punishment. The larger damage came from public exposure. Her social circles vanished almost overnight. Charity boards removed her. Community organizations cut ties. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends stopped answering. The luxury life she spent years constructing turned out to be built on borrowed trust. Once that trust disappeared, so did almost everyone around her. The hardest moment came when she requested a private meeting. Against Marcus's advice, I agreed. We met in a conference room at her attorney's office. She looked nothing like the woman who sat confidently at family brunches. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Even the anger was gone. Only regret remained. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then tears filled her eyes. I never thought it would go this far. The sentence made me sadder than I expected. Not because I believed her, because I did. That was the problem. Kendra never expected consequences. None of them did. They expected the money to keep flowing. They expected donors to keep trusting. They expected me to stay quiet. When did you stop being my sister? I asked softly. The question hit her harder than any accusation. She covered her face and started crying. Real crying. The kind people cannot fake. I don't know. It was probably the most honest thing she had said in years. I left without saying goodbye. Some relationships don't end with closure. They end with acceptance. Connor eventually lost his freedom. Kendra lost the life she built. But Terrence's punishment became the story everyone talked about. The church immediately suspended him after the gala. 3 separate investigations followed. Donor lawsuits arrived. Financial reviews arrived. Media coverage expanded. Every week seemed to reveal another lie, another secret, another contradiction. The man who once stood in front of thousands preaching integrity now spent his days sitting across from attorneys explaining signatures, transfers, emails, and false statements. Then came the moment that finally broke him. During sworn testimony, federal investigators presented the fertility clinic records, his signatures, his authorizations, his acknowledgments, the same documents displayed at the gala. For nearly an hour, he tried to avoid answering direct questions. Eventually, he ran out of places to hide. Did you know the child was biologically yours? The attorney asked. Terrence stared at the table. Yes. The room went silent. 1 word. 3 letters. Years of lies destroyed by a single answer. Did you knowingly accuse your wife of carrying another man's child? Another long silence. Then the answer. Yes. Watching the recording later felt surreal. For months, he manipulated narratives, controlled conversations, directed public opinion. Then, under oath, facing evidence he could not escape, the truth finally cornered him. He lost his position. He lost his influence. He lost his reputation. Most importantly, he lost the image he spent his entire adult life protecting. Vivian's punishment arrived differently. No courtroom, no arrest, no public spectacle, just consequences. The churchwomen who once admired her stopped calling. Community leaders stopped inviting her to events. The family image she spent decades protecting disappeared almost overnight. One afternoon, she arrived unannounced at my new home. I almost didn't answer. Almost. When I opened the door, she looked older than I had ever seen her. Smaller, too. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered the words I spent my entire life wanting to hear. I failed you. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Mine, too. Not because everything was fixed, because some truths arrived too late. She apologized for the ballroom. She apologized for choosing appearances over family. She apologized for watching other people define my worth. For nearly an hour she talked. When she finished, I finally understood something. My mother loved me. She always had. She was simply weaker than the image she spent her life protecting. And weakness can hurt people almost as much as cruelty. We didn't become close again overnight. Real healing doesn't work that way. But for the first time in years, honesty existed between us. Sometimes that's where forgiveness begins. 6 months after the gala, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The delivery room contained no chaos, no accusations, no lies, just peace. When the nurse placed her in my arms, everything else disappeared. The investigations, the lawsuits, the betrayal, the pain. All of it faded behind the simple reality that my daughter was here, healthy, safe, loved. I named her Hope Washington Brooks. Hope, because she survived everything meant to destroy her before she was even born. Washington, because Jamal deserved to remain part of the story. Without him, none of this would have happened. Without him, I might still be trapped inside the lie. Several months later, Sterling invited me to New York for the final estate transfer. The conditions had been fulfilled. The forensic report was complete. Authorities had received the evidence. The investigations were active. The trust activated automatically. $77 million officially transferred into the foundation Jamal designed for me. But the money wasn't the most important part. Jamal left something else behind. A letter. His final letter. I opened it alone. The first sentence made me cry immediately. If you're reading this, then you finally stopped doubting yourself. I laughed through tears. That sounded exactly like him. The letter wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about winning. It was about freedom. Jamal wrote that the greatest mistake people make is allowing others to decide who they are. He reminded me that strength isn't proving people wrong. Strength is refusing to let them define your future. By the time I finished reading, I understood what he had really given me. Not an inheritance, a second chance. 1 year later, the Jamal Washington Foundation funded scholarships, small business grants, financial education programs, and support services for women rebuilding after betrayal, divorce, and financial abuse. Thousands of people benefited from resources that never would have existed without his vision. Every success felt like another conversation with him, another reminder that good people can continue changing lives long after they're gone. The final surprise came 18 months after the gala. I was speaking at a community event when a reporter asked a question everyone seemed to want answered. After everything they did to you, do you feel like you won? The audience grew quiet. I looked toward the front row where my daughter sat in my mother's lap, laughing while Marcus tried unsuccessfully to teach her how to stack blocks correctly. Nearby, Sterling was arguing with a donor about baseball. For a moment, I simply smiled. Then I answered honestly, no. The reporter looked confused. No? I shook my head gently. Winning would have been keeping my marriage, my family, and my peace. The room became silent. Then I looked back at my daughter. What happened instead was something better. The reporter waited. So did everyone else. I learned exactly who people were. The ones who betrayed me lost everything they built on lies. The people who stood beside me became family. My daughter has a future built on truth. And every morning I wake up without fear. I smiled. That's not winning. I paused. That's freedom. The audience rose to its feet. Not because of the money, not because of the scandal, not because of the investigations. They stood because everyone understands freedom. And as the applause filled the room, I realized something. Terrence, Connor, Kendra, and even my mother never understood. The greatest punishment isn't losing money, status, or power. It's watching the person you tried to destroy build a life more beautiful than anything you ever had. And that was exactly what happened. Justice arrived. Truth survived. Karma did its work. My daughter was safe. The lies were gone. And for the first time in a very long time, the future belonged to us.